Hello and welcome to Who's the Bossk? It's a Star Wars podcast from laughingplace.com. My name is Mike Celestino. I am your host. I am the lead Southern California reporter and editorial director for Star Wars content at Laughing Place. This is episode number 127 of Who's the Bossk, and we will be talking about episode 9 of Star Wars Andor, the live-action Disney Plus series. And for that conversation, I have invited on the show for the very first time, although we have made a couple attempts. This is the first time where it's actually happened. Fellow Laughing Place contributor, Luke Manning. Luke, how are you? Thank you so much for coming on the show.
I'm doing good. I wish I had a title as long and impressive as yours, but
you just got to make one up. That's
good.
how I do it, I think.
I'm the editorial director of
something or other
stuff.
So tell us a little bit about what you do, because you're a relatively recent addition to the Laughing Place family. What kind of stuff have you been contributing over there at laughingplace.com?
Well, a lot of the news posts that you'll see come from my pen. But otherwise,
now, are you writing them in pen? Because I could think of a more efficient way.
Well, yeah, I might want to think of a better way to do that, actually. But yeah, no, I cover some events every now and then. Yes, Doobie is absolutely correct there. I guess I will be the editorial director for Doctor Who when that starts rolling around for Disney Plus, and I'm working on a few ideas at the moment to kind of introduce the Disney world into Doctor Who and kind of have a little bridging of the gaps sort of thing.
Gotcha. But yeah, you got to come up with the name of a Doctor Who podcast that's a play on a 80s TV sitcom, and we'll be good to go.
You know, it would give me it would take me some time, but I'm sure there's something I can come up with.
Who's the Boss is already taken, by the way.
Yeah.
Anyway, so you used to be here with me in Southern California. Mm-hmm. I've run into you at the Disney parks here, and then recently you relocated down to Orlando, where we already had a bunch of people. What happened there? I haven't talked to you about that. What made you decide to head down to Florida?
A lot of things, life changes and that sort of thing. But I'm at the moment I'm just kind of bumming it with my parents and seeing where life goes from there. But yeah, no, it's nice.
Florida's great.
Florida is great. Yes. I do prefer the weather in California, but Florida's a pretty good place too.
Some would say Florida is just a big swamp, but I don't know. No,
I outside of Orlando, yes.
All right. I also want to welcome and thank Rebecca Mosley for joining us as the recurring guest co-host for this week's episode. Hi, Rebecca. How are you? What's been going on?
I'm doing well, Mike. I am gearing up for a trip to Luke's part of the country, heading back to Orlando to cover some events on behalf of Laughing Place. So very excited. It's the holiday season, which means there's a lot for our team to do. So I'm excited to be heading back out that way for a little bit.
Sounds great. Hope you enjoy that trip. And we are going to be talking about Andor in just a bit, but first, because this is Luke's first time on Who's the Bossk, we legally have to do something called the 5 Star Wars questions. Luke, are you ready for this?
I'm ready.
All right. We're going to start off with number 1 of the 5 Star Wars questions. What is your earliest Star Wars memory?
It surprisingly didn't take me too long to think of this. I remember watching Return of the Jedi probably when I was like 5 or 6 or something, and I vividly remember seeing and like being amazed by the very last, well, not the very last scene, but the scene where Luke takes off Vader's mask. Mm-hmm. And yeah, there's just like I have a vivid memory of me sitting in front of the TV, probably actually like sitting cross-legged in front of it, and just watching that. But aside from that, it would be just riding Star Tours, the original Star Tours, when I was younger, because that was one of my favorite rides to go on. I remember as a kid, I grew up in England, so I went to Disneyland Paris pretty regularly.
Okay.
The first 10 years of my life, and I remember my top three things in Discoveryland and in all of the park, honestly, were Star Tours, Honey, I Shrunk the Audience, and Le Visionarium, which was the timekeeper. And for some reason, those were my big three things in in Disneyland Paris. But
you weren't into the Nautilus walkthrough.
I did enjoy that, but I don't think that was like as big of a priority.
Okay.
For and mind you, I was a nerdy Disney kid, so I Food Rocks and Spaceship Earth were my favorite things growing up at Epcot, and throwing Honey, I Shrunk the Audience too. So I've always liked those things, but yeah, I guess the Nautilus thing was never huge on my list there.
Yeah, we've talked about this before, how for a lot of Disney Parks fans, Star Tours is often the first exposure to the Star Wars universe, so that would make sense. Absolutely. So number 2, which is your current favorite Star Wars movie or TV show, and why?
This is probably gonna get, I don't know, this could be controversial, but I think my favorite, and part of that goes back to childhood memories too, which shows my age.
Yeah.
But my favorite is probably Revenge of the Sith.
Okay.
And I definitely think the original 3 are better movies from a writing point of view and just from an enjoyability point of view. But there's something about Revenge of the Sith. And I remember, I don't think I have ever been more excited to see a movie in the theater than I was to see that. And it came out in 2005. So to an 11-year-old kid, it was everything I wanted it to be. Sure. I had kind of built it up. I remember having this memory of like, how did Anakin become Darth Vader before that movie came out? And it was just a thought I had of like just a grown-up Anakin just running kind of like, I don't know, in like a Tatooine type environment or something. No idea. It had no basis in any Star Wars thing, but I just remember seeing Revenge of the Sith, and it lived up to my expectations.
Yeah, I rewatched the prequel trilogy last year, and I remember thinking like, I liked Revenge of the Sith more on this rewatch, and thinking it's actually a pretty solid movie. And I think by the third film, obviously in the prequel trilogy, I think George Lucas got his stuff together. So
minus the dialogue, of course.
Yeah,
the dialogue is just as ropey in that one as it is in the other two. But from a directorial point of view, like there are some incredible shots. The CGI is also like, it's good in Phantom Menace. It's great in Attack of the Clones, but it's like, it still stands up today in Revenge of the Sith. Yeah,
absolutely. Okay, number 3. Who is your favorite Star Wars character and why?
I think I'm going to be relatively basic at the moment and say Ahsoka Tano.
Okay.
I
actually don't know if we've gotten that one too often, so I don't know how basic that is. Maybe once or twice, but certainly not terribly often.
Okay. Yeah, no, there's something about the character that as she has developed, I have enjoyed her a lot more. And I remember watching the Clone Wars like towards the beginning of its run, and then going off of it for quite a few years, and then finally like jumping back in and watching it all. And like, I really enjoyed her character arc. So then when Rosario Dawson popped up as Ahsoka in The Mandalorian, that was really cool too. And I'm really excited to see how they further her character.
Yeah.
And also, I got to meet Ashley Eckstein 3 days ago, so
that's awesome.
Yeah.
So you're a fan of both performances, both Ashley and Rosario's. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah, and I think they can. I think they can live in the same sort of world. And Rosario Dawson is obviously playing the character as a, you know, I wouldn't say older, but she's definitely like a more mature
Right.
version of the character.
Yeah, absolutely. Can't
Mhm.
wait for that series next year. Number 4, if you lived in the fictional Star Wars universe, where would you fit in? What faction would you belong to? Some examples, of course, are the Jedi Order, the Sith, the Rebel Alliance, the Empire, the Bounty Hunters, the scum and villainy hanging out in the cantina, or anything else you can come up with. What do you think, Luke?
I would say the scum and villainy.
Yeah.
I don't know. Everything else just seems like a lot of effort. Uh, from whichever way you look at it, whether it's like possibly be getting killed by the Empire or possibly getting cut in half by a lightsaber.
Yeah.
There's a lot of options. So I don't know. Maybe I'm just a low life in Oga's Cantina.
So you're not going with your namesake and going down the Jedi path. By the way, are you named after Luke Skywalker? You're not, are you?
No, I'm not.
Okay.
No, I don't. I don't believe I'm named after anything specifically, but
Okay. Gotcha.
my parents just like the name.
Just like the name. Okay, good to know.
Mhm.
Okay, the fifth and final of the 5 Star Wars questions is called Impression or Possession. This is where I ask my guests to either do a Star Wars impression or opt out and simply tell me about a favorite Star Wars possession they may own. What do you think, Luke? Which one do you want to do?
My heart's telling me to do the impression, so I think I'm going to do the impression. And this
Go for it.
this is dumb. This is great. I love it, and I do this far too often. I have been trained in your Jedi ways by Count Dooku.
I love it. General Grievous is pretty good.
The best character in all of Star Wars. You can
Like
fight me on that one.
Like I always say, if I can tell who it is, it's a successful impression. So
Exactly.
hit it right on the head there. I
Fantastic.
love it.
Thank
Okay,
you.
that brings us to the end of the 5 Star Wars questions. Now, I want to cut away to a couple of interviews that I did. So you may know, if you're listening to the show, you may know writer Cavan Scott, who is a big presence in the current Star Wars publishing world. He's one of the creatives behind the High Republic, but he's also got a brand new comic book series coming from IDW Publishing called Dead Seas. And IDW reached out to us and asked if we wanted to do some interviews to promote this comic. And I jumped at the chance to talk to Cavan Scott again, because I'm a big fan of his Star Wars writing. I also got to read the first issue of this comic called Dead Seas. So I spoke to Cavan for, I think it's between 15 and 20 minutes. I also got to speak to the artist for the comic book named Nick Brokenshire. So I'm going to play the 2 interviews that I did. They're both about 15 to 20 minutes long, and they're both Cavan Scott and Nick Brokenshire talking about the new IDW comic book Dead Seas coming next month in December. Here we go. So those are my 2 interviews with Cavan Scott and Nick Brokenshire, the writer and artist of IDW's new comic book miniseries Dead Seas that starts in late December. And you can go out and tell your local comic shop, like Cavan Scott recommended in the interview, tell them that you want to check out Dead Seas. They can do the pre-order for you just so that they know that there's interest in it. And hopefully it'll be a successful run for them. I also wanted to mention, I totally did not know this when I interviewed him, but Nick Brokenshire turned out to be the lead singer, the front man for this band called Blues Harvest, which you probably get the joke if you're a Star Wars fan, but they played at the 501st party at Star Wars Celebration 2019 in Chicago. And I thought they brought the house down. I really enjoyed their show. They were incredible. They did a bunch of great covers. I've talked on this show before about their cover of the song Dance Magic Dance from the movie Labyrinth, which was amazing. And I didn't know that he was the lead singer for that band when I interviewed him. I was doing more research afterward, and I saw that he was in that band, and I really regretted not talking to him about that. So if I ever get the chance to meet him or talk to him again, I'll be sure to bring up Blues Harvest. But thanks to Kevin Scott and Nick Brokenshire for those interviews. Go and check out Dead Seas coming from IDW in December. Okay, that brings us to Star Wars headlines for the week. And the big news, actually, it wasn't a big week for news, but I did read and write a review of the new High Republic novel called Star Wars The High Republic Convergence by Zoraida Cordova. Now, if you are a regular listener of Who's the Bossk, you know I've been a supporter of the High Republic in general, but I have to admit that this book in particular didn't really do it for me. I actually struggled to get through this one. I did like Zoraida Cordova's other book, which was Star Wars Galaxy's Edge, A Crash of Fate. I thought that one was better written and just like a little bit simpler. This one felt a little convoluted to me. I just, like I said, I kind of struggled to get through it, but I felt like I had to be honest in my review. I always try to give my true feelings about the book, and this one just didn't quite work for me. Nick, are you aware of this High Republic publishing initiative at all?
I'm going to assume you meant me.
Sorry, Luke. Yes, sorry. I was talking about Nick Brokenshire, and now we're back to Luke.
You're
sorry
good.
about
You're good. 4-letter words. Mike,
Yeah.
Luke, the same thing. I am definitely aware, but
Okay.
I don't. It isn't something I have delved into really at all.
Yeah, basically it takes place a few hundred years before the original trilogy, and it's about the Jedi Order kind of at the height of their powers as the galaxy is kind of expanding out into the outer rim. And it's been mostly pretty good to me. I've really enjoyed a lot of it. The comic books I think I've been more into than the novels. But this one just didn't quite hit for me. So can't really recommend this book in itself. The first book in phase 2 that came out last month called The Path of Deceit, I actually thought was great. So I would recommend going and checking that one out before this one. There were some comic book reviews also that I put up this past week on laughingplace.com. Star Wars number 29 in the main Star Wars title, which I really enjoyed, by Charles Soule. Bounty Hunters number 28 by Ethan Sachs, and The Mandalorian number 5. Now, the Mandalorian comic is just an adaptation of the series. It's pretty much the same exact stories that you would see in the episodes of the TV show, but told obviously in comic book form. And the other 2 stories I thought were very good this month from both Star Wars and Bounty Hunters. What about you, Luke? Have you read any Star Wars comics? Is that something that's on your radar?
No, it's one of those, especially with like, I was never a huge comic book person growing up or anything like that, and I've read some, but there is just, whether it be Star Wars or Marvel, there is so much to dig into.
Right.
So it's really like, where do you start? And then it becomes stressful, and then you just don't bother doing it.
No, I can see that. There is so much content. Like I often say, I spend a good deal of my time, my job, my work time consuming Star Wars, and I still feel like I'm behind on stuff. So yeah, it can be overwhelming for sure. But speaking of something that I don't know much about, this past week in the video game Fortnite, which I know of but have not played, now you can play as Luke, Leia, and Han in that game. They were added as characters or skins. Luke, do you know anything about this?
Yeah, only through having friends that have younger brothers and play it a little bit, but I don't really understand how the game really works, or if it is a game. I mean, it is a game, but just like exactly what sort of game it is,
I haven't watched this video before. Now Rebecca's showing it on the screen there, and Luke was just like paragliding in on the land speeder. He was like holding onto the bottom of the land speeder, which seems very odd to me. But it looks
an
like
interesting setting too.
Yeah,
it kind of looks like I don't know how I feel about the whole Luke, Han, and just a bunch of random people charging at Darth Vader. That doesn't seem very Star Wars to me.
Yeah, I'm totally in the dark as far as Fortnite goes, but I guess you can play as these characters now if you want to.
And apparently not only do they have the land speeder as a glider, but I've also seen people reference, I believe, that they even have the Millennium Falcon is
Okay.
similarly available as a glider form
Fair
for
enough.
you if you are a Fortnite user.
There you go. So that was for Skywalker Week, I guess. Whatever. I don't even know what that is, but that must be a Fortnite thing. But there you go. Speaking of Ashley Eckstein, who you met a few days ago, she's going to
I
be
did.
at Disneyland Resort this Saturday.
Now you could meet her.
I could meet. Have I
Yeah.
met her before? I've definitely seen her in person before. I don't know if I've
Mhm.
spoken to her. But she's going to be signing her new book, Star Wars Every Day. It's both in the park on Main Street in Disneyland, and then after that, she's going to downtown Disney at the Star Wars Trading Post. So, what was your interaction with her like, Luke?
It was actually at a media event for Fantasmic.
Okay.
And one of our fellow Laughing Place contributors, Jeremiah, introduced me to her. So it was just a very nice, like, hey, how are you? Just very sweet lady. Very, very sweet.
Yeah, she seems very nice.
Just said, hey, I really enjoyed the shorts that just came out, and she thanked me for that. And yeah, I'm not the sort of person to I like to meet and talk to a celebrity or someone that I admire, but I feel really bad about myself if I go up and I'm like, I want your picture, please take a picture with me. And it makes me feel uncomfortable, so I can't imagine how it would make them feel.
Sure, no, that makes perfect sense. You want to connect with them as a human rather than just get a selfie. That makes perfect sense.
And if you are a fan of Ashley's, be sure to check out barnesandnoble.com, because she's doing quite a few signings as part of, I'm guessing in relation to this book. So it's a kind of a book tour of sorts. I saw that she's going to be at the Grove on the 7th, and I see that she's going to be in, I want to say this other one in December is in the Ohio. Yeah. In Ohio. So be sure to check out Barnes & Noble for more Ashley Eckstein signings.
I should say I have the book, Star Wars Every Day. It's on my coffee table. I've flipped through it. I haven't read through it. I haven't taken a time to look in more detail at it. But next week, I think Tuesday on laughingplace.com, I'm going to put up my review of Star Wars Every Day by Ashley Eckstein. So watch out for that. Let's see. Coming to merchandise news, there was the MCM Comic Con in London, I believe, and they had a panel for Hasbro, the toy company, and Hasbro revealed some new action figures coming to the Star Wars Black Series and Vintage Collection. The ones that jumped out at me that I'm most excited about is Mara Jade, who is not a character in the current canon of Star Wars. She was from the old expanded universe, now called Legends timeline, which I, of course, grew up on as a teenager. And now you can get her in the Black Series coming up next year. And then also there's going to be 2 more characters coming from the video game Knights of the Old Republic, which is also in the Legends timeline. And it's Darth Malak is there, the one you're showing right now. And then what's the lady's name?
Is it Bastilla Shan?
Yeah, Bastilla Shan. Yeah, that's it. She's a Jedi character, so that's cool. I'm into the EU. I like the Legends timeline, so it's good to get more figures, more action figures from that period. And there's also a new Dr. Aphra figure coming out in the Black Series. So some fun stuff. You can find out all about that on laughingplace.com. And then we found out also about a new Funko Pop vinyl figure of Grogu from The Mandalorian in his Thanksgiving Day balloon form, which is very strange. It's like two stages removed from Grogu. Are you a collector of these pop vinyl figures, Luke, at all?
I kind of am, but
yeah.
My first question is, has there been a actual Thanksgiving Day parade float of Grogu yet? Okay, there has.
Yeah, I think it debuted last year, if I'm not mistaken. Okay. So this float, and I want to say, if I'm not wrong, Rebecca, correct me if I'm wrong, the balloon itself is the Funko Pop. It's not just Grogu, right?
Yes, no, my recollection is that the balloon last year was a Funko Pop form of Grogu, and that they actually had that Funko Pop available. But now you have it complete with like these balloon handlers.
Right. It's very meta.
Yeah, it's cute.
Yeah.
I feel like I would probably just get one of Grogu by himself over that, but
Right. But if you go ahead.
Oh no, I was just thinking of what Star Wars Funkos I have, and I think I have an Ahsoka Tano one, and then a couple of Rey.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, I never quite got into the Funko Pops. I have some that I was sent to review or whatever, but I never I think I like my action figures. There you go. I like my action figures to look like the way they do in the movies, you know. And these guys are just weird with the big eyes and no pupils, you know. What's
now
that?
You got to make one of yourself.
This
Yeah.
this was
koosh
sent
ball.
to us in the holiday box as Shop Disney gets us excited for the holiday season, and
Okay.
it's called a cameo, and it's like from Koosh, and so it's
it
like
is from Koosh.
it's like a little character within a Koosh, and so they call it a Koosh cameo.
Okay,
So there's
that's cute. Very
funny?
nice.
So,
so we also got some.
them.
Speaking of Shop Disney, and I think this came out through StarWars.com, but we are getting some new Life Day merchandise for Life Day this year, which is November 17th. Last year they put out some Life Day merch, and then they've got some new. Oh, they've got a robe. You can actually buy the robe. That's fun. I didn't even see that. That's cool. And I know there's an updated version of the Chewbacca plush that I've got here behind me. He looks different. He looks like Fizzgig from the Dark Crystal to me. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that character. More than Chewbacca.
Yeah, he doesn't have kind of his teeth bared as he did last year. He almost had kind of like this grimace face last year, but this year, no. And then they also have a variety of items representing kind of the Wookiee families gathered for this season, and with the phrase celebrating together or life and joy and things like this. So a lot of red among the items. So
these are all available on Shop Disney right now?
Yeah, and they've been spotted in the parks too.
Okay, so at Disneyland and at Walt Disney World, you can get this Life Day stuff. And I'm actually going to be there on Life Day at Disneyland, probably in the evening this year, because I did the morning last year, and everybody else was there in the evening, so I kind of like missed out on the big celebration. But yeah, I'll be at Disneyland, probably in Galaxy's Edge for Life Day, November 17th. Excited for that.
Yeah. And I hope to be at Batuu East. So.
Oh, great. We'll have a cross country celebration of Life Day from from Batuu. Bring Home the Galaxy is in its third week, and this is the current merchandising campaign from Lucasfilm and Disney products, and they revealed a bunch of new Star Wars products from the Mandalorian. What would you describe this as? That Cincy thing?
It's a scent warmer. So you would put the scented melt that you see in the packaging on the right. You put it inside of this, and then it has a warmer inside, and it melts and it makes the room smell beautiful. And the smell is called the Age of Adventure, and it features the Mandalorian and Grogu in that famous end scene there on the packaging. But the Mandalorian helmet is the scent warmer. Really attractive device there. You've got some new Funkos, Mike.
Yeah, so these are all from the Book of Boba Fett. They're all like I want to say like reveals from the Book of Boba Fett, like stuff that happened later on in the series that they probably weren't allowed to make as the show was coming out. So now you've got, you know, Cad Bane, and there was one with Grogu calming down the Rancor. And there were a handful of other ones. There's some cool Star Wars blankets. I like these. Yeah, these are really nice. They each represent a planet from the original trilogy. So there's one that's Tatooine, one that's Hoth, and one that's Endor. And they're just really nice looking. I think they're like $100 each, but they are very cool looking. I like them a lot. And then there's a new Black Series action figure for the character of Vel Sartha from The Mandalorian. So I think they're probably going to be releasing or announcing one of these every week for the Bring Home the Galaxy campaign. So check back every Tuesday morning on laughingplace.com, and we have a roundup that we've been putting up of all those reveals and announcements. The last entry in Star Wars headlines this week, as we've been doing lately, is just the new character posters that got released from Star Wars Andor. And this week we got two, actually. There was Kino Loy, the character played by Andy Serkis in the Imperial prison, and then Saw Gerrera, played by Forrest Whitaker, originally from Rogue One, a Star Wars story, and now he popped up the previous episode on Andor. So check those out on the official Andor Twitter account. And that's going to bring us to, go ahead, Luke.
I was just saying that Andy Serkis's motion capture technology just keeps getting better and better. It looks so realistic now.
Yes, that's a great point. And it's a great segue also to our main topic this week, which is the 9th episode of Star Wars Andor on Disney Plus. The title of the episode was "Nobody's Listening" with a exclamation point at the end. Let's talk to Luke first about his expectations for Andor before the show started. What were your hopes? What were you thinking going into this series? And what did you think of the previous 8 episodes, not counting this week's, Luke?
So before the show started, I honestly didn't have too much of a thought one way or the other. I was excited for it, and I knew I was going to watch it just because it's a Star Wars thing. But there wasn't a lot released where I particularly was too excited about it, and until it got towards when reviews started to come out, and most of those reviews started to say, "Hey, the first 3 episodes are a bit of a slog to get through, but it's kind of worth it, and it's a very good slow build." And I think that's you have to be okay with slow television, and that is slow does not necessarily equal bad.
Right. I definitely agree.
I think that's the case with Andor, and I think the first few episodes were, I would say, probably up until the heist episode, I was, some good, interesting things happened, but there wasn't a lot going on. But then every episode since the heist episode has introduced some new things. And just constantly kept the anticipation and the suspense, and especially in episode 8 and also 9, just like the dread as well. And it's something you can really feel. It feels tangible.
So this week's episode, like I said, was called "Nobody's Listening." It's the second episode where we're in this Imperial, or Cassian is in the Imperial prison, and we kind of feel like we're in there with him, I think. But what did you think? What did you end up thinking of this most recent episode, Luke?
I enjoyed it. I really liked the stuff with Bix, and also the growing forming of Mon Mothma's side of the rebellion.
Yeah.
I do think it kind of the Andor focused sections did kind of fall into that trap of the show's kind of been doing a little bit of showing the same thing happening quite a lot. There's only so many times I can see them at that table fixing that thing, and I get that it's supposed to replicate, like, that's how they feel in prison. Like, it's trying to make you feel as they do, but I feel that way, and I want to move on.
Right. How about you, Rebecca? Now, you enjoyed last week's episode, I remember. So how did you feel about Nobody's Listening?
I also enjoyed this week's episode. I found myself not ready for it to be over.
Okay.
Very interested in and my husband, Doobie, he I think this was his favorite of all the episodes so far. So it really grabbed him, which always, I think, when you're watching it with somebody else and you can tell that they're also heavily engaged, I think that, tends to improve your enjoyment of it as well. There were moments, I'm eager to kind of break it down, because there were moments in this that I will use generalizations and say, I think there are moments in this where me, having lived life as a female, as a woman, are going to process a bit differently, perhaps, than Mike or Luke, since you have not lived as a woman. So I'm kind of curious to see, kind of your take on some things, because this, just like I say, generalizations. Not every single every single woman will feel X, or every single man will feel X, but I'm eager.
Well, do you want to talk about those moments now, or you want to?
No, wait till we get to them.
Okay.
I'll wait till we get to them.
I'll say that I last week I think I expressed that I didn't love the episode, but this time I did. I liked the episode quite a bit more. I think because I knew at this point, okay, this is going to be the 3-episode arc where we're in the prison, so I've kind of accepted that. I feel the same way as Luke, where I am kind of ready for them to get out of this place and move on to something else. But at the same time, I think that the writing and the performances are so good that it is really like captivating, especially Andy Serkis. Boy, he's so perfectly cast in that role and is really knocking it out of the park, I think, as an actor.
Killer. We'll get there, obviously, but a killer final line for the episode.
Yes.
That was probably the best end to an episode, because I feel like in the previous 8 episodes, the it's just kind of ended. It's just kind of been like, hey, we're done with the story for now. Tune back in next week. But this one was like an actual cliffhanger.
Yeah, very building you up to what's going to happen. I have to admit, I have seen the next episode, so I'm not allowed to talk about that yet, so I got to remember to keep it to this week's episode. But yeah, it is a very exciting build up to what we're going to see. I'm sure I can only imagine what we're going to see next week in Andor. But my favorite stuff, as has been the case, my favorite stuff I think was with some of the other supporting characters, kind of where they're cutting around to the different factions around the galaxy, and we're getting to check in on what's going on in some of these. Boy, I really am. I know Rebecca and I have disagreed about this character Cyril Karn, but I am fascinated by this guy, and one of my bullet points later on, we might as well talk about this now and just get to it so we can get past it. But yeah, I feel like this guy, I thought for sure after those first 3 episodes we saw a couple of months ago, I thought for sure this guy's path was going to be to join the Empire and hunt Cassian Andor that way. But now we got to the point where he kind of had the opportunity to present himself to the Empire, and this Imperial ISB agent Dedra is just so put off by him because of his intensity and his fixation on Cassian Andor that it just seems like I can't picture any way that he's going to get in to the ISB at this point. I don't know. What do you think, Luke? What are your thoughts on this character? What do you think his overall function is going to be in this show, now that it looks like at this point he's not going to be part of the Empire? Or do you think he will be?
I'm interested to see what they do with him, because what they've done so far hasn't really intrigued me. It's kind of like, oh, we're back on this guy again. And I'm looking at it from a way of I think and hope that they're going to do something with him that will make all of this plotting through worth it. But I think he could either end up being doing something to Andor solo, like maybe going with bounty hunters or hiring a bounty hunter, something on those lines, or something happens where the Deirdre, right?
Dedra is her name.
Dedra.
Yeah. I said that's going to be the number 1 girl's name in the next year, Dedra.
Dedra. Maybe something will happen where she gets so desperate that she's like, I need something on him, and I can go to this guy.
Yeah.
And then she'll have him by a leash, and he'll prove himself, and Imperial dreams come true.
Right. It could go any of those ways. And I think we all know that he's eventually going to cross paths with Cassian Andor again, although it's tough for me to predict at this point how it's going to happen. And that's what I really love about the path that this character is taking. But to me, the really interesting thing about him is that he is getting rejected by pretty much everybody, including the villains. Like, he's not even accepted
And
into that
and
faction.
his
Yeah.
own mother too.
And his own mother is so overbearing and
Mhm.
critical of him. I don't know. Have your thoughts or opinions on this character changed at all, Rebecca? Have they
Oh
evolved with
no, he's become
no
so much more horrifying.
more horror?
I found him horrifying from the day one he arrived on the scene, and even the moment between him and Dedra,
Yeah.
like literally skin crawling for me. I wanted to leave the room. I wanted that scene to be over. So because it felt so like real as
Yes.
okay. So I tend to find myself in kind of male dominated realms
Okay.
just based upon my interests and what kind of what I do for a living. So I'm often kind of the only girl in the room or one of very few in the room, and sometimes what'll happen is you'll make this connection, but it becomes very awkward and very uncomfortable because there's this shared camaraderie that they elevate for some reason, may elevate in their mind kind of that male female connection, and that's not there at all. But because you had this other thing in common, somehow that translates to them into this weirdly intense like male female dynamic, and
Yeah.
that was how that moment felt between between them to me. Like he felt like she should really like him because they have the same common, this goal, this interest. How do you not see that in me? How do you not want to be with me? Because and oh, it was like I say, oh, just every muscle in my body just got so uncomfortable. I was just like, oh, please, somebody come interrupt this conversation. Something happened. This needs to end. But it was interesting because in looking online, I found some people carried it even further than I did. Carried carried it to a more violent nature. And so for them, they're now speculating and wondering if we're going to see something more ugly regarding that dynamic between him and Dedra. I didn't go that far. I didn't see that kind of dynamic, but it was just I like you, Mike. I'm very interested to see kind of what exactly is it, how is his brokenness going to impact this storyline? Because my expectation is that the brokenness that we keep seeing kind of over and over again is somehow going to be part of the fall, is going to be how Cassian slips through their fingers or whatever, because we so often have seen within Star Wars that is the arrogance of the Empire, right? That lets the rebels, get in there. And I kind of feel like we're gonna see that play on kind of just the much smaller scale within this character, kind of this arrogance, this grabbing tighter and then having him slip through the finger, right?
Right.
It's that kind of thing.
Yeah, that moment where he said, oh, he like basically found a reason to live when he saw her dedication. It's like, boy, that's
No,
creepy.
yeah.
But yeah, even on the opposite end of the spectrum from what you were talking about, I've seen people like shipping these two characters, and my
Right?
response was like, well, she clearly is not interested in him,
No.
at least at this point. It would be very surprising to me if it goes that way.
And his
Before
behavior is
she
stalker.
What's that?
before she exclaimed that, like her distaste for him, I
Yeah.
definitely thought that I knew it wasn't going to go that way, but like part of my brain was like, are they going to kiss?
Oh, wow. Oh,
So
oh
the
no.
thought definitely went through my head, and then I was like, oh wait, no, that's not going to happen.
Yeah, it's to me, it's fascinating. It's definitely something we haven't seen in Star Wars before, this kind of relationship, and I'm very curious to see where they're going with it. But
Mm-hmm.
to get on with the rest of the episode, the title, like we said, is called "Nobody's Listening," and obviously that's a line from the episode. But what would you say that means in terms of the theme of this episode, Luke? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Not really, other than like just I don't think it's that meta of a title. It's a very like nobody's listening. He's
Yeah.
thinking all these things through, and nobody's listening to him. So nobody's listening to him, and the Empire specifically is not listening to him
Right.
either.
Well, what I was thinking is I've been talking about how the prison, this Imperial prison, last week I talked about how it didn't quite feel like Star Wars to me. It felt more like a dystopian sci-fi novel like 1984 or Brave New World or the George Lucas movie THX 1138. To me, this line in the title and also that scene in the episode where Cassian is talking about how the Empire doesn't even care enough to be listening to them. That was the Gilroys or whoever wrote this episode. The writer was named Bo Willimon, the House of Cards guy. But that's them pointing out the difference between what's going on here and what you would see in something like 1984, where Big Brother is always watching you. Like this. In this case, Big Brother is not watching you. That's like the opposite of 1984. So to me, it was just them kind of like drawing a line between what you would see in some like a dystopian type of sci-fi story and this empire that's like omnipresent but doesn't care enough to even look after their own prisoners. They have a prisoner, Andy Serkis's character, working as the supervisor of this whole other group of prisoners. It's not even an Imperial guy doing that. So they don't have enough people, or they just don't care enough. Did you have something?
A mixture of both, I think.
Yeah.
I think that's a great parable for some like corporate America sometimes.
Right. Right.
Well, and you also have within the series itself, you also have the fact that the communications have been shut down. So even though Bix was on that phone, nobody was listening. And then you have Mon Mothma there in front of the Senate, and people are getting up and walking out as she's leaving. So nobody is listening. So it was interesting to me that given the title that you kind of have it demonstrated within several characters of nobody listening. So
that's a great point that I didn't make that connection, but now that you've mentioned that, it does also apply to the Senate.
You could throw it into the also to the torture scene with Bix, because she's saying these things. Are you going to believe? And she says, "Are you going to believe me anyway? Are you going to listen to me anyway?"
Right. Let's get into that. Let's get into the torture, because this is another thing that jumped out at me right at the beginning of this episode, how dark they're willing to go, because this episode starts with torture, and the torture process that they're using is to make Bix listen to the screams of dying alien children, which is just about as dark as Star Wars has ever been. And then the episode ends with a character dying of a massive stroke, which is also something we've never seen in Star Wars. I've talked before about how when I think a different character had a heart attack in an earlier episode, to me, it didn't seem very Star Wars. I think by this point, I've kind of accepted that the show is going to go there. And so to me, it wasn't as jarring this time around. It still felt very grim, obviously. What do you think, Luke? Is there a point where this is getting too dark for Star Wars, or is this just the tone of this series and we have to kind of take it for what it is?
I personally am not one that has a problem with that sort of thing.
Okay.
Kind of to throw things back to Doctor Who, especially in the classic era, there was a lot of complaints there in various different periods where the producers at the time took the show to more violent and more horrific, tame stuff compared to some of the things you see today on TV, but they took things to a new level, and none of that has ever bothered me. I think that just pushes the boundaries of what you can do, and especially now that the Star Wars universe is expanding as far as like TV series and movies go. The only way you can do that and keep it fresh is by doing something different. And I think that was a big problem that the Book of Boba Fett had, and maybe to a certain extent Obi-Wan Kenobi, but definitely Book of Boba Fett, is that it just felt like more of the Mandalorian. What was there to distinguish Boba Fett from Mandalorian? Whereas Andor feels very distinct.
Yes.
Like it or not, whatever your opinion on it is, it feels like its own distinct show with its own flavor and its own design that fits into that Star Wars universe and tells you what, like, I can see this leading into Rogue One, and I can also see where Revenge of the Sith led into this. But it's all about doing something different. So even if the tone is a little bit darker, that's what's being done different here.
Yeah, totally agree with everything you just said. And even though it does feel very different, I do think they keep wanting to remind us that we're still in Star Wars. Like, there's these little moments. First of all, in my review, I pointed out the conversation between Cassian and Andy Serkis's character, where he suddenly uses the word droid. Cassian says the word droid, and I had this moment where I was like, oh yeah, it's Star Wars. Like, there's droids somewhere. They're not there in the room with them, but there's droids somewhere walking around outside of this room somewhere. But there was also, at the end of that interrogation scene, the torture scene, there's a shot that directly quotes a shot from the original Star Wars film. The scene, you probably noticed it too. The torture scene, the interrogation scene in the original film, where the little interrogation droid is coming at Princess Leia with the needle, and then the door slams shut, and the camera like whip pans down to the floor, and you see the Imperial officers like boots walking away, and that exact same shot is in at the end of the torture scene here. So I do think they want to keep one foot in the Star Wars that we're familiar with. Look at this. Rebecca has the split screen ready to go.
I didn't, and this is seeing it on Twitter after the fact is where I picked up on it.
Okay.
I picked up on it while I was watching, in that I instantly, when this was happening, I instantly thought of Leia and those moments in A New Hope, but I didn't realize how deeply they had gone with the comparison until I saw the side by side. I didn't realize just how deeply they reflected the kind of the beats of that scene. So while it's being more direct in how ugly torture is, this is where Lucas had taken me in A New Hope.
That's true.
So for me, it's almost like this is like, okay, so I have a better understanding of what it was, but I was just as scared back then and as intimidated and awkward and uncomfortable and hoping the scene would end as I was here. So it's very interesting. The reality in some ways is like, okay, Leia has become even more so of a heroine, of a hero, after kind of seeing a more ugly depiction of it.
I also think they're reminding us that this is the same empire that blew up Alderaan and tortured Princess Leia, whatever. Because they, we talked about this last week, how they kind of pulled the rug out from under us in getting us to. I know you probably didn't root for Dedra at all, Rebecca.
This was a debate early on. Luke. I was telling Mike that I had a hard time with the show because they were trying to make me cheer for the bad guys, and I just really couldn't do it.
But yeah, this is them telling us, yes, these are the same people that are the villains in the original trilogy, and we are not necessarily meant to be on their side. And I think that was successful in this episode. Any other moments or scenes that stuck with you from this episode, Luke?
I thought that scene was really good. I also really enjoyed the last scene, really, as with the build up of Andor telling Andy, or trying to get Andy Serkis's character to kind of be on the same page as him, and you have that build up throughout the episode, and then at the very end, bang, they're on the same wavelength.
Yeah, that some good screenwriting right there. That's like clockwork, setup and payoff. I really enjoyed that as well. How about you, Rebecca? Anything else? Any other scenes or moments that were memorable to you?
The sequences between Mon Mothma and the reveal that she has a familial connection with Vel, who we had seen, you know, with kind of in a more hands in the ground, you know, kind of right on those front lines of the rebellion. Yeah, I very much enjoyed that. And I love the notion that this is actually like what, a rich girl, because she tells her,
Yeah.
just go be a rich girl, you know, go be a rich girl for a while, a frivolous rich girl.
It's a good disguise.
Uh-huh.
That's
It
right.
works.
Yeah.
I love that. It made me that much more interested in the character. Now, you know, in my head, I'm kind of like, okay, so what events kind of got her on this path? Where did she go from being, you know, kind of in a cushy, you know, devil may care environment? It would seem that's, you know, what you think of when you think of rich girl, right? You think,
Right.
she doesn't have a worry, and yet she kind of gave all that away in you know, to risk her life for this. What was it that you know, flipped that switch for her?
Yeah, it is interesting to see the privileged kind of upper crust class of the Star Wars galaxy taking that leadership role, both in Mon Mothma and now we know her cousin Vel Sartha. They're both leaders in different ways in the rebellion. So that I thought was interesting as well. Yeah, anything we didn't like in this episode? I thought this was a pretty solid one. I don't really have any much negative to say. Do you guys?
I'm worried for his mom.
For Cyril's mom?
For Andor's mom. No, not for Cyril's mom. By the way, I'm sorry, but is Cyril's mom really throwing off like a Jason Alexander in Seinfeld?
Estelle Harris, Mrs.
Thank you.
Potato Head.
Is she not really kind of throwing off that kind of energy?
A little bit there,
yeah.
The Sansa energy.
Boy, that moment where she's like criticizing him nonstop, and then he reveals that he got the promotion. Yeah, exactly like a light switch.
Like a light switch. Yeah.
She pours him another bowl of cereal.
By the way, I saw an interview where he said that cereal is actually really tasty.
Oh,
and
yeah?
I can't believe it's not on shelves right now, because I would go buy some of this Star Wars looking cocoa.
I am also amazed that they did not make that connection and put that straight on the shelves.
Yeah, cereal, right? It sells itself, right?
I don't know, yeah, something.
I love the moment where he's like trying to ignore her by slurping the blue milk out of the bowl.
Oh, totally.
Boy.
Totally.
Yeah, I'm intrigued by that whole situation there. Okay. Then last thing I want to ask you guys is hopes and expectations for. We've got 3 episodes left in this season. Luke, what do you think's going to happen? What do you hope is going to happen as this season starts to wind down of Andor?
Yeah, well, because they're kind of, I guess they kind of broke the whole 3 episode thing.
Yeah, I haven't really talked about that because there was 3 in the beginning, then another 3 with the heist. Then we had 1 episode which ended with him getting arrested, and now there's another 3 episode arc of the prison. So yeah, it did break the pattern.
Yeah. So and I mean, theoretically, I would like to see the prison stuff finished up in the next episode so that we can get to like something big for the last because there's 12 episodes, right?
Correct.
Yeah, so something big for the last 2, something that hopefully leaves us hanging on for the next season, which I know is going to be at least a year away, probably more than that.
I think they have started production, so yeah, it's probably roughly a year from now. How about you, Rebecca? Anything now that we've seen this 9th episode? Anything you're looking forward to or hoping for, expecting?
No, actually, this one left me kind of like unsure because I initially really expected to see a lot more on his home planet, and now I'm wondering if they're going to more deeply resolve his home planet. Not the childhood home planet, the more recent Ferrix.
Yeah.
But now I'm wondering if they might leave that a bit unresolved until the 2nd season. So I'm
you said,
you're curious.
You're concerned for Marva.
Very much.
his adopted mother. So yeah, next time we cut back to Ferrix, we might be worried that she's gonna get tortured or interrogated, or you never know.
Yeah, because Dedra is very clearly no holds barred.
Right.
She just wants what she wants, and she doesn't care.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, we'll see what happens next week on Star Wars Andor. Looking forward to chatting about that on the next episode. And that brings us to the end of that discussion and to our final segment here on Who's the Bossk. It's called First Steps into a Larger World. This is where we talk about the media that we've been consuming and or enjoying outside of Star Wars. My example this week is a horror movie called Barbarian. That's actually a Disney property. It was released under, I think, 21st Studios or 20th Studios, whatever they're calling it. And I enjoyed this movie. It's kind of like crazy. It's one of those movies that starts off very differently than it ends. And in fact, if you go watch the trailer is like totally misleading. And the trailer makes up maybe the first like 25 minutes of the movie, and then it goes in a completely different direction, which I love because I like not knowing what to expect. So I would recommend this, but only if you're really into dark, disturbing horror. This actually reminded me of the TV show, the Tales from the Crypt, from like the late 80s, early 90s on HBO. It was tonally kind of like that show. So if you're a fan of like that sort of horror, I would say check out Barbarian. I watched it on HBO Max. It's got a good cast. It's well directed. And it's unpredictable, I would say, is my one-word description. What about you, Luke? Have you been reading, watching, playing anything lately?
Well, first, let me say about Barbarian. I actually was able to see that during San Diego Comic Con for Laughing Place.
Yeah.
So I wrote the review for it for our site.
Was it a positive review? I haven't read your review yet.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I was very. I didn't really know much about it going into it, so I'm just told, hey, you're gonna go see this movie. Cool, I'll see it. And I like horror movies, but I'm not like, I don't see every horror movie that comes out. But this one, it did exactly what you said. It went places that I didn't expect it to, and that made it so much better. And the lead cast, Georgina Campbell, was really good in it, and it was excellently directed too.
Yeah, but definitely agreed.
As far as what I've been watching, I've been on an American Horror Story kick.
Okay.
Because there's the most recent season, which just started, New York City. So I'm about I'm got a couple of episodes to catch up on that. And then I was sitting there and I was like, I want more episodes of this. So I decided to go back to a season I haven't watched, which was 1984, which was 2 seasons ago. Okay. And that one was that one I've got about halfway through now. And I remember watching the first episode when it aired, and I wasn't into it. And then it picks up starting with the second episode. So definitely recommend it, because I know a lot of those American Horror Story and a lot of things from Ryan Murphy can be kind of hit or miss. But those 2 seasons, at least so far, have been really good.
Fantastic. Yeah, I had a similar experience with the first ever season of American Horror Story. Like, I watched the first episode and I was like, oh, this isn't really doing it for me. So I never went back and finished it. I just kind of went on to other stuff. But I guess, like you're saying, it probably gets better.
And they all, I mean, each season has a different vibe to it and a different story. So you can kind of like go through it and be like, ooh, I really like the 80s and slasher films. Then that's a good one for you to go for. If like Spooky Hotels is more your vibe, then go for the Spooky Hotel season.
Cool. I'll have to check that out. All right. What about you, Rebecca? Have you been enjoying anything lately, or too busy?
No, I just have to laugh because we've got slasher film over here. We've got American Horror.
Hey, we're just coming out of October. It was the kind of month to watch horror stuff, you know.
Meanwhile, I'm watching Hallmark Christmas movies. So that's what's happening in my universe. Oh, I'm all blurry now. But no, I will have to say that I have watched 4 of them in the recent weeks. I would say A Cozy Christmas Inn and jolly, good Christmas, skip it. Not impressed with either one of them. I mean, and Hallmark movies are what they are. So, I mean, I understand I'm not talking about, epic movie making, but no, you can skip those. However, Noel Next Door, great execution of the typical gal falls in love with guy who's actually the problem in her life. She has this problem with, grumpy person. She doesn't know personally, but she keeps encountering the grumpiness of this individual. But then she actually falls in love with the person in person, not realizing it's her, nemesis. So that one was good. Noel Next Door.
Okay.
And then another one that was out there is it's called A Kismet Christmas. And this one involves magical cookies that help you find your true love. Very sweet, a little bit of that Christmas magic. Nice, just, heartwarming. Sweet story.
There was a period about a decade ago where I became fascinated by this phenomenon of I guess you would call them the Hallmark Christmas movies, this like kind of cookie cutter cottage industry of, and there were two that I watched back then. One was called A Princess for Christmas, and one was called A Christmas Prince. And the thing that jumped out at me about those is that they were both shot in the same location, in the same castle. I don't know if you've noticed this. Like, there's this one castle that they use. I think this castle has been used in a bunch of these movies, I'm guessing.
Oh, totally. Yeah, there are definitely certain locations or cities. In fact, there's been a few last year where some of the leading men would end up like just in the background of the other guys, just for fun. He'd just like be walking in the background of it because they're all shooting in the same little town anyway. So it's really fun. So people who create kind of these like Hallmark universe, kind of like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, so that people have some fun with that too. So
it's like the Pixar theory where they're all connected.
Right?
What's that, Luke?
How many of them do they make a year?
Oh, I haven't even counted, but I have a calendar on my refrigerator and I list them all out. And I have foil stars, and gold star means excellent. I would watch it again. Silver means it was good, but I don't need to watch it again. Green means not great, but not terrible. And red means I probably didn't finish it, or I would never recommend it to anybody. I have a gold part.
I actually I'm going to request that you send me some of your findings because I am, like I said, I have been fascinated by this genre before.
It reminds me very much of Harlequin romance novels, in that those are very similar. If you pick up any number of the Harlequin romance, it's very much the same tale, just maybe one set in England, whereas one maybe it was set in Texas. But you still have very much the same kind of dynamic regarding what the character formula is of the female role and what's going on there. There's certain like cookie cutters, plug in characters here and make story.
I really enjoyed, for some reason, there was a trilogy on Netflix called The Princess Switch.
Yes, with Vanessa
Hudgens.
Those are fun.
Those were really fun. I think that's about as close as I've gotten to.
Those are super fun. And the third one, Mike, she plays Vanessa Hudgens. She's the gal from High School Musical. She plays this character, and it's kind of like Prince and the Pauper, where you have like one is a princess, and the other, and the other one doesn't have that regal.
The other one's an American
baker, American baker, as I recall. But in the third one, they bring in a cousin who's kind of that, reminds me of back in the days with Bewitched, where you'd have Serena, right? You'd have Samantha and you'd have Serena, and she'd have like the black hair instead of a blonde and the heavy makeup instead of no makeup, that kind of thing. So they bring her in with that real kind of trashy cousin. So.
All right. Princess Switch trilogy. That might be next on my Netflix queue. And it's
a good one to watch when nothing much else is going on.
Well, we're doing puzzles on Thanksgiving, or something like that. Okay, That's going to bring us to the end of this week's episode of Who's the Bossk. I want to thank my guest, Luke Manning. Thanks for taking some time out of your busy week to come and chat about Star Wars and other stuff. Really appreciate it. And then also Rebecca Mosley for guest co-hosting and doing all the behind the scenes tech and bringing all those images up. Thank you, Rebecca, as well.
Oh,
And we'll see you right back here next week on Who's the Boss. We'll be talking about Andor episode 10. As always, please visit laughingplace.com for all your Disney news and opinions, and follow me, aka the Who's the Bossk podcast, on Twitter at Who's the Bossk Pod is the name of the Twitter handle. My name is Mike Celestino. Thank you out there for listening. We'll see you right back here next time. Thanks again. Bye.